Okay, let's dive right into this explainer and crack open a 2,000-year-old cold case using some absolutely incredible modern geological remote sensing data. We're looking at one of history's most dramatic vanishing acts, right? The ancient Greek city of Helike. For centuries, this whole event was just considered a myth, a classic legend of divine retribution. But today, we're going to see how cutting-edge science actually solved the mystery.
Now, what's really fascinating about this historical witness testimony from the Greek traveler Pausanias back in the 2nd century AD is just how terrifying and absolute the destruction was described to be. He essentially recounted how the sea just advanced over the land, covering absolutely everything, even the sacred groves, until literally only the tops of the trees were left poking out of the water.
The ancient accounts basically treat this like a supernatural crime scene. During a single winter night in 373 BC, this entire city was just swallowed by the sea. And honestly, the craziest part, it didn't just flood and drain. The city stayed submerged beneath the water for over 500 years. So here's a quick look at our timeline. We're going from the city's early Bronze Age origins, around 3000 BC, to its sudden destruction in the winter of 373 BC. Then we jump way forward to 1995, when a modern proxy earthquake provided the ultimate clue, leading us right to the actual rediscovery in 2001.
Section 1. The Victim, a Thriving Metropolis.
Before we investigate the crime itself, we kind of need to understand the victim. Helike wasn't just some tiny, insignificant fishing village. No, it was a booming, wealthy coastal hub. It was actually the capital of a 12-city association known as the Achaean Dodekapolis. Located just 2 kilometers inland in the highly active Corinth Gulf, it was so prominent that even Homer dropped its name in the Iliad as participating in the Trojan War. But above all, it was this massive cultural and religious center completely devoted to Poseidon, and it even featured a famous, towering bronze statue of the sea god himself. You'd really think being the ancient equivalent of Poseidon's #1 fan club would buy you some sort of insurance, but as history shows us, that clearly wasn't the case.
So, the big question we have to ask is, what exactly happened on that fateful winter night in 373 BC? How does a major city, sitting 2 full kilometers from the coast, just completely drop off the map?
Well, for millennia, the accepted story, which was echoed by heavy-hitting historians like Diodorus, Strabo, and Pausanias, was simply that Poseidon unleashed his wrath. The sequence of events they wrote down started with a massive earthquake in the dead of night, followed at dawn by a towering tsunami that violently dragged the whole city underwater. In fact, Strabo wrote that ferrymen could still see that giant bronze statue of Poseidon standing upright beneath the waves. And this tsunami theory stood largely unquestioned for thousands of years.
But when we actually look at the geological data in this explainer, we run into a massive, glaring flaw in the tsunami theory. Think about it for a second. Tsunamis are incredibly destructive, yes, but they rush in and then they retreat back to the ocean, right? They don't leave entire cities permanently underwater.
A standard tsunami just simply cannot explain the permanent sinking. A really comprehensive MDPI study on the region's geological hazards shows that the maximum fault displacement in the Corinth Gulf is only about 1.1 to 1.3 meters. So, to put that in perspective, that means the absolutely largest tsunami possible in this specific area would only be maybe 4 to 5 meters high. That is nowhere near big enough to permanently drown a city sitting 2 kilometers inland. Plus, when archaeologists finally uncovered the ruins in 2001, they found them buried under fine lagoon mud, not the coarse marine sand that a violent tsunami would typically leave behind.
Section 2. The modern clue. The 1995 quake. Fast forward to 1995, and Mother Nature actually gave scientists a real-time reenactment of the ancient disaster. A 6.2 magnitude earthquake struck right between the Selenothis rivers and Caronitis rivers. That is the exact same delta where ancient Helike once stood. Researchers immediately rushed to the coastal zone, bringing in marine remote sensing tech, specifically side-scan sonar and sub-bottom profilers. And by analyzing the seafloor's acoustic backscatter patterns and taking some deep borehole samples, geologists uncovered exactly how the ground here behaves under extreme stress. They found clear evidence of a massive coastal landslide triggered by the quake. And amazingly, historical records showed a super similar event happened back in 1861, where the Earth literally opened up and the coastal fringe just sank right into the sea.
Section 3. The true culprit revealed.
So, what did the 1995 data tell us? Well, the remote sensing data pointed to 2 highly specific, interconnected geological phenomena. The first is soil liquefaction. You see, the delta plain where Helike was built had a notoriously high water table, and seismic profiles showed there was actually trapped gas below the surface. So when the intense cyclic shaking of a 6.0 to 6.7 magnitude earthquake hit, it forced all that water and gas straight upward. This essentially turned the solid sandy soil directly beneath the city into liquid soup.
The second phenomenon is something called a translational landslide. Once that soil layer, which was sitting about 3 to 5 meters below the surface, liquefied, it acted like a giant slip and slide, which, is a lot less fun when an entire city is riding it. The top layer of the earth, holding all of Helike, detached and just slid gently seaward as a massive, rigid, intact block.
Which means the city wasn't crushed by a towering wave at all. Instead, it was effectively lowered straight down into the earth. First, the earthquake shakes the ground. Then, the deep subsurface soil layer liquefies from the vibrations. The whole landmass slides toward the sea as one cohesive block. And finally, the city just sinks below sea level, allowing the sea to naturally rush in and permanently fill the void.
According to the geological models, the land subsided by up to 10 meters. 10 meters! That is a massive drop. It transformed a vibrant coastal city into a permanent, submerged lagoon almost instantly.
Now, when we compare the ancient myths with the hard remote sensing data we have today, it all clicks together perfectly. The historical witness accounts incredibly match the terrifying reality of a liquefaction landslide. Remember Strabo saying the bronze statue of Poseidon was seen standing perfectly upright underwater? Well, that really only makes sense if the city wasn't violently tumbled by a massive wave, but rather slid down and sank as one cohesive, intact block. The ancient people weren't exaggerating at all. They were just describing a translational landslide using the only vocabulary they had at the time.
So what you should really take away from this explainer is just how powerful it is when history and modern geology collaborate. Helike wasn't magic, and it wasn't divine punishment. It was a complex geological event perfectly preserved in historical trauma. It really leaves you wondering, how many other legendary tales of angry gods and vanished civilizations are actually highly precise observations of natural phenomena, just waiting for modern science to decode them?